Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com, and in this tutorial we're going to look at Model 1 and Model 2 architecture, and we're going to look at a very powerful way you can structure your programs so you can get your JSPs and your servlets working together and create a scalable architecture even if you don't use any kind of framework. So I'm going to start by creating a new project here. Let's go to File, New, Other, Dynamic Web Project, and let's call this MVC for reasons that I will explain shortly. And this all looks great. Let's click Finish. And I'm going to give this a few JSPs. So let's imagine that to start with, when you come to your site, you want to see a JSP called index.jsp. Let's click Finish there. And now let's imagine you've got some other JSPs that you might want to then go to from the initial page. So let's create, just as an example, a login.jsp. And on there I'm just going to put, this is the login page. So I'm not actually going to implement it. And I'm going to say new JSP, and let's have a about.jsp, and let's say this is the about page, and let's also have an error.jsp as well. So I'll call this error.jsp and click Finish. And let's say in here, well, I'm going to say here the action parameter is missing, just for reasons that we'll see shortly. Now the question is, how do you get these JSPs to talk to each other? When JSPs first came out as a technology, people would write applications that just had links in, of course, HTML links, hypertext links, and Java scriptlets. And so the JSPs would all call each other. You could go to one JSP and that could call up another JSP through a link or through a form for that matter, or even through some Java doing a forward. And so all the pages on your website will potentially have the potential to go directly to some other page. But that meant, and that is a legitimate way to create a website, and you can create a website like that if you want. Just create a load of JSPs and embed Java in them where you need it, and of course use extra classes and import them using the techniques that I already showed you. And that's called Model 1 architecture, and the problem with it is that you end up with sort of a tangle, and you'll never, you can really lose track in your head of what the flow, the sequence of pages that the user takes through your website is, because each page can call every other. It's kind of like a tangled rat's nest. So for that reason, Model 2 architecture was developed. And Model 2 architecture means basically Model View Controller Architecture, or MVC for short, which is why I've called the project MVC. And what that means is, in this context, is that you'll typically have a servlet that's going to act as a controller, and that means that that one servlet, all requests are going to be routed through that, and it's that servlet that will decide which JSP page, or HTML page for that matter, to go to next. So we're going to look at implementing that here. Now I'm going to go here and I'm going to create a new servlet, which is going to be my controller. So this is going to be the servlet that decides what page to go to next. Let's click Servlet there and click Next. And I'll call this controller, and let's put it in a package called controller as well. And so like in Model View Controller architecture, model means your data model, stuff that's directly related to your database and data handling, and view means like the stuff that's directly related to presentation logic, which is kind of the JSPs in this case. And controller is the other stuff. It's the business logic, so-called, and it's the logic that decides what page to go to next. And you know, if there's any other logic that has to be done, any kind of processing, then it's done in your controller. And the controller could be several classes, but I'm going to have one main controller class that takes decisions about what page to serve up next. So let's click next here, and that all looks okay. And let's just run it, because this stuff can be a bit quirky and sometimes you can get problems. So it's better to get them out of the way to start with before you've written a load of code. So let's update the context root, well, I'm not sure if that matters here, and see if we get a nice blank page. There we go, that looks good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to have, in this case, we're going to look at forms later on, where you can click a button and then that will go to another page, or possibly stay on the same page if the validation fails. But for the moment I'm just going to put some links on this page, and I'm going to imagine that somewhere in this web page here, let's say this is the home page, you're going to have like some links that go off to other pages. So let's say here, although you don't have to go through the controller for all your links, you probably want to go through the controller for well, probably all of them really, because then you can see at a glance in your controller what the logic is that controls which page is going to come next, and that's the whole idea. Let's have a hyperlink here then, and I'm going to give that a href, and in this href, the page that I want to go to next, I'm going to specify the controller URL. So let's just run the controller again. In fact, I'm going to specify the controller context root, which is this bit, plus the actual controller name as well, class name. So let's paste that in there, and this means, in case you don't know, when you specify URLs in a website, you don't normally specify the whole URL, because of course the domain will change. You're not going to run your website on your local host, so you normally specify in links just this end bit of the URL starting with a slash, and that gives you a URL relative to the domain name. So let's say here, and now I'm going to supply this with an action parameter. So I'm going to put a question mark, after which I can list some parameters separated by and signs, but I'm going to just have one called action, like this, and it's just an arbitrarily chosen name, it could be anything. I'm going to say here that action equals, and let's say login, and let's put the text of the link, let's set it to go to login page, and while I'm at it, let's just surround that with p tags to put it on its own line with some space underneath it. I'm going to have another one of those here. Let's have a same URL again going to the controller servlet, but this time I will say that this the action parameter is about, and that's intended to go to the about page. So if I run this now, it's not going to be functional yet, but there's a couple of links, and if I click on that, either way it's going to go to the controller servlet, which isn't serving up anything yet. So now let's fix that. Let's go to the controller servlet here, and because I'm going to a link there and clicking on a link, that will ultimately invoke the doGet method, because by clicking on a link you're doing a HTTP GET in technical terms. And what I'm going to do here is, firstly I'm going to get the that action parameter, so I'm going to say string action equals request. Remember, request is stuff that comes from the browser to you, to your servlet. Request.get parameter, and let's put in there action, like that. And now underneath that, now I want to specify, well, what I'm going to do later on, let's just fill in the start bits and end bits here, is let's have a string here, and this is going to be a page, and I'm going to set that initially to null, why not, and then I'm going to have some logic here that decides what page to go to next, and then at the end I'm going to forward to that page. And remember, if you do a forward, unlike with a redirect, the browser never sees the contents of the actual page that you're going to, if there is any. It sees the contents of the page you've forwarded to. So I already showed you one way of doing a forward with request.getRequestDispatcher, I think it is. I'm going to do it a slightly different way here, which is equivalent, but just in case you come across it in code somewhere and you want to know what it is, I'm going to say get servlet context like this, and .get request dispatcher, and I'm going to dispatch to this page that I'm going to figure out in between, and then just say forward. So the request dispatcher kind of just wraps some content in effect, and I can forward to that content, and I'm going to supply the existing request and the existing response to the page that I'm going to, in case I want to use it there. And now in between I'm going to say, here, if page, if action, so if the parameters equal to null, and we have to check for that possibility, then I'm going to say that the page is going to be equal to, well actually let's set the page by default equal to /error.jsp, and then I don't have to I do still have to handle the null case. So let's say here equals error.jsp. In fact, yeah, maybe it's clearer if I just leave that like that. So we're going to figure out what the page is going to be, and this is going to be what I forward to here. And now the kind of syntax rules for this this page here is that this thing here that you supply to get request dispatcher, that's got to start with a slash, and the actual rest of the URL is relative to the current context root. So the current context root here is MVC, so it's going to start with a slash, which is going to be like this slash, and then it's going to be like this part of the URL basically. So I'm going to say here, let's just maximize the editor, if the action's null, go to error.jsp, and error.jsp will say the action parameter is missing, and then let's say else if action.equals, and I had one called about, so in that case I can go to page equals about.jsp, and there was also one called login, so I'll say else if action.equals login, then page equals login.jsp. And while we're at it, let's also have a it's possible that the action could be something weird because someone's typed it in themselves trying to hack the site or something like that. So let's just say else, go to error.jsp. So now this logic, it doesn't necessarily have to be decided here. You could have other auxiliary Java classes that will figure this out, but the most important point is here that you're going to route all your gets and posts, and we're going to look at posts later, through this one servlet, so that you know where to find the logic that decides what page you're going to see next. Now let's run that. Let's go to index.jsp, the home page of my site, click finish there, and hopefully it's on its way. There we go. This is the home page. So you see, if you look down the bar here, you'll be able to see the URL as I hover over the links. If it's not off the edge of the video, I hope it isn't. And it's just saying controller action equals login for this one. And if I click on that, it goes to my controller servlet, and the controller servlet says, okay, the action's parameter is equal to login, so we'll serve up the login page. And of course you can go here to the about page if you want. So this is Model 2 architecture, which is MVC, or Model View Controller architecture, and this is the controller. And this provides you with a really powerful, scalable mechanism for building your websites, and it's the one that we'll be pretty much sticking to in the rest of this tutorial series. So that's it for this tutorial. Join me again next time, and until then, happy coding.